But this kid, and he's a young guy, he's a buffoon, he looks like a buffoon. Here, I'll show you pictures so you know that I'm not making it. This guy, he thinks he's like a revolutionary leader. What revolution are you leading, motherfucker? This goofball's leading a country, man. He's got all these weapons at his disposal. He's killing everybody around him.
And suddenly, an unhinged strongman with a ridiculous haircut and nuclear arms.
Kim Jong-un has gone from being a reclusive madman who is hell-bent on blowing up the world to a super social madman hell-bent on blowing up the world. This is good. This is good.
China is the one that the only one that can control Kim Jong-un, this crazy fat kid that's running North Korea.
몇 명인가? 오늘 봐봐.
뭐 사다가 놓고 뭐 여기로만 이제 가다가 어디도 않고 이제 언제 그거 생각해서 뭘 이래전 조용히 뭐 집이야 안 가서 뭐 낭길에.
North Korea continues to be one of the most talked about yet least understood nations in the world. Since talks between the US and North Korea have taken place during the Trump administration, Kim Jong-un and his nation have been in the media more than usual. Yet those in the West still miss the point when it comes to North Korea and the Kim regime. It's easy to point and laugh from a distance at what we might call a backwards country and partake in name-calling directed at the leadership, but all of that ignores the self-genocide of North Koreans at the hands of the only ones capable of stopping the massacre, the Kim regime. A closer look at North Korea takes away the humor and thoughts of the Kim family being stupid or crazy. US policy towards North Korea has mostly been to ignore the human rights violations and allow the state to eventually collapse upon itself. This strategy has largely been ineffective due to lack of understanding of Juche, an invention of Kim Il-sung, the fundamental ideology holding the country together, and has done so successfully for over 60 years. Kim Il-sung was born April 15, 1912 to a middle-class Christian family eking out a living as farmers. Born during a time of Japanese imperialism and with parents who were leaders in the anti-Japanese movement, it was his grandfather who initially motivated him and his siblings to fight against the Japanese imperialists, supposedly telling him it was proper for a man to die fighting the enemy. His brother, Kim Chol-ju, would die at the hands of the Japanese. While in high school, Kim Il-sung had been imprisoned for his involvement in a Marxist group. His early interest in Marxist ideology and Christian upbringing mixed with the Confucianism already in Korean society would spark his evolved form of marxist-leninist theory called Juche. By 1937, he was commander of the Northeast Anti-Japanese United Army, the division of Kim Il-sung, and by 1940 he was commander of the 2nd Operational Region, becoming the most feared guerrilla in Manchuria. The Korean Communist Party, founded in 1925, was the beginning of an ideological difference in Korea. The both were funded by Moscow. Korean Communist Party and the North China Korean Independence League initially had democratic slogans and measures for greater human rights regarding what they say capitalist societies ignored, such as the rights to work, food, medical treatment, and education. But this is standard for Marxist ideology, being intentionally ambiguous with no concrete human rights to the individual. Kim Il-sung in his early career as a revolutionary would use this Marxist theory mixed with Neo-Confucius values to invent an ideology uniquely Korean. Having lived through the separation of Korea, Kim's ideology was quickly being validated. He saw the March 1st movement as lack of meaningful action. Kim Il-sung believed that the thought of President Wilson's doctrine of self-determination and Western powers being what would free Korea from Japan was foolish, exemplifying why upper-class or bourgeoisie Koreans couldn't be trusted to rule. During his time as a guerrilla leader, he had developed fame among the poor farmers and Korean nationalists, seeing him as a Robin Hood type figure. His reputation and loyal followers would catch the eyes of the Soviets. Though the Soviets, on the same side ideologically, at the start of World War II executed and imprisoned many Koreans on the assumption they could be Japanese spies, including Kim Il-sung. Korea's dependence on foreign countries and his imprisonment by his supposed ally would reinforce one of the key principles of Juche, self-reliance, which we will get to later. In 1945, the Soviets appointed Kim Il-sung leader of Pyongyang. Those around him spoke of his philosophy of life and obeyed his command. Kim's aura of influence and cult of personality was starting to develop as Soviet good standing in Korea began to wane. In 1948, Stalin's picture was removed from the founding of the Korean People's Army. During one of his first speeches, Kim told of his plan to build a completely self-reliant nation, and in 1949 he would for the first time be referred to as Supreme Leader. Kim Il-sung was much loved by the people, with his ideas for an independent Korea widely popular among his peers. He was viewed as a great leader, but it wasn't until 1955 that his ideological stance was officially put into the open. This would be the origin of the word Juche. In his speech titled Eliminating Dogmatism and Formalism and Establishing Juche Ideological Work, he would go on to say, "True, we should be active in learning from what is progressive internationally, but we should develop fine things of our own while introducing advanced culture. Otherwise, our people will lose faith in their own ability and become spineless people who only try to copy from others." This was the turning point in which Juche became a dominant narrative for North Korean life, and it was added to the country's constitution in 1972 and reiterated by Kim Jong-il in 1982. In 1997, North Korea started the Juche calendar, which begins in 1912 on Kim Il-sung's birth. Juche has been deeply ingrained in everyday life in North Korea. The term Juche most closely translates to self-reliance, but not in the way Westerners think. Self-reliance is meant on an individual, national, and international scale. The state shall not rely or look to other nations to interfere in any way with their domestic affairs. Citizens will not travel or take place in any sort of multiculturalism, be it food or entertainment, etc. Juche says man is the master of everything. North Koreans have a duty to the nation and the leadership to work towards the common goal. Juche stresses the importance of independence and creativity in its citizenry to push the state forward and promote all to work and live unified as one and independent of outsiders. Kim Il-sung is not only the representative but also the representative of Juche. In his 1955 speech, Kim Il-sung said, "We should firmly adhere to marxist-leninist principles, applying them in a creative way to suit the specific conditions of national characteristics of our country." He would also speak ill of Syngman Rhee, then president of South Korea, invoking hyper-nationalism and insulating those aside from the Kim dynasty who wouldn't rule with the people's best interests. However, that idea wouldn't become official until 1974. The Marxist-Leninist idea, including the cult of personality, mixed with the values of Neo-Confucianism, such as loyalty, reverence, and obedience to the authority, made an ideology that worked seemingly perfect for North Koreans and Kim Il-sung. One might best think of Juche as anthill ideology, which suggests that all ants work together for the betterment of the colony. One ant can do little, while ants working together can achieve greater goals. The queen is nothing without the ants, and the ants will lose all purpose with no queen. The queen ant serves as parent of all ants in the colony, and only she can produce an ant that is determined by birth to be the successor. It's important to note that Juche is not merely a suggestion, but it is policy, a way of life imposed by the government that carries severe punishment. Under the rule of the great leader Kim Il-sung, people were better off than their southern neighbors through much of the 60s. This success can partly be attributed to Soviet backing, but citizens were willing to all work towards common goals and take Kim Il-sung's word as gospel. Prior to its addition to the Constitution, Juche had not been established in areas of social life. North Koreans still sang foreign songs, painted foreign landscapes, and believed in the dogmatism of Marxist-Leninist ideology. Flunkyism, or the idea of simply adopting someone else's ideas, in this case from the Soviets, was recognized as a social problem in that citizens should look inward to the greatness of North Korea. This introduced a sense of solipsism within the population that explains why everything from the outside must be believed to be done internally. The next step in securing Juche would be the 10 principles for the establishment of a monolithic ideological system that were announced in 1967. They would later be updated and become official in 1974. The 10 principles read as followed. We must give our all in the struggle to unify the entire society with the revolutionary ideology of the great leader Kim Il-sung. We must honor the great leader Comrade Kim Il-sung with all our loyalty. We must make absolute the authority of the great leader Comrade Kim Il-sung. We must make the great leader Comrade Kim Il-sung's revolutionary ideology our faith and make his instructions our creed. We must adhere strictly to the principles of unconditional obedience in carrying out the great leader Comrade Kim Il-sung's instructions. We must strengthen the entire party's ideology and willpower and revolutionary unity, centering on the great leader Comrade Kim Il-sung. We must learn from the great leader Comrade Kim Il-sung and adopt the communist look, revolutionary work methods, and people-oriented work style. We must value the political life we were given by the great leader Comrade Kim Il-sung, and loyalty repay his great political trust and thoughtfulness with heightened political awareness and skill. We must establish strong organizational regulations so that the entire party, nation, and military move as one under the one and only leadership of the great leader Comrade Kim Il-sung. We must pass down the great achievement of the revolution by the great leader Comrade Kim Il-sung from generation to generation, inheriting and completing it to the end. The 10 principles greatly stress the Kim family's right and legitimacy to rule. Unconditional obedience to the leadership and Juche. These principles resemble Christian concepts to create what one could call a state religion. Daily life is greatly affected by the expectations set in this document, not only by citizens, but by any visitors who are subject to punishment upon failure to adhere to these principles. This is one point where Juche splits with Marxism in the belief that one person, especially one within the Kim family, can change the course of history. The Kim regime now held the power to control all of society and day-to-day life. Freedom from Juche isn't possible because these 10 principles are a successful attempt at thought control. Every U.S. administration since the end of the Korean War has known the severity of the human rights violations, yet done very little to help the suffering North Korean population. The international community for decades ignored the totalitarian regime harming their own people. It wouldn't be until 2013 that the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights would call for an inquiry into what, quote, may amount to crimes against humanity. Seemingly uncertain language, although previous UN reports had detailed 9 patterns of human rights violations, and a 2012 report from the International Food Policy Research Institute said North Korea's hunger situation is at a serious level. Genocide Watch, a nonpartisan NGO, in 2011 would publish a report stating there is, quote, ample proof that genocide has been committed and mass killing is still underway in North Korea. This comes in the forms of killing half Chinese babies, genocide on religious grounds, and political genocide of those who dare go against the Juche and also the regime. The independence and self-reliance of Juche is part of what causes food shortages because any outside assistance is seen as a weakness, and Korea must solve their own problems. As time moved past the more prosperous days of Kim Il-sung, Juche became less popular, but more harshly enforced upon the people. The crimes are intentionally vague, but punishment is always strict. Their laws include crimes against the state and nation, management of the national defense, the socialist economy, socialist culture, the state's general administrative management order, the socialist collective life order, and citizens' life or property. Protection of the state and the culture are highly emphasized. Anti-state and nation crimes have 14 provisions ranging from conspiracy to subvert the state to failing to report a crime. Punishment can go from reform through labor to the death penalty, sometimes done so publicly. For decades, North Korea has been open about their ideology almost as a sense of pride, leaving one to wonder why UN nations haven't taken any serious action against North Korea, often ignoring it altogether. Elected leaders within the United States haven't bothered much to understand or act on the human rights violations in North Korea simply because they haven't needed to. Since the ceasefire in 1953 until the early 1990s when high explosive tests started, the US simply ignored North Korea aside from a few incidents regarding American interests. Even though North Korea followed a similar ideology to Cuba and the Soviets, President Kennedy would stand strong against two while ignoring one. Lyndon Johnson, after the Pueblo incident, moved to save American lives held hostage in North Korea. He would apologize and quickly forget North Korea altogether, just as so many Americans forgot the Pueblo incident. Seriously, look it up. The North Koreans to this day still possess an actively commissioned U.S. ship. Nixon, following a U.S. spy plane being shot down by North Korea, had written plans to nuke North Korea, but his advisors would talk him out of it because it risked heightening Cold War tensions in East Asia. Ford would threaten to go to war due to 2 Americans being killed in the DMZ. Carter has visited North Korea multiple times after his term, but during one had little to do with the country. The lack of U.S. action can be attributed to North Korea being unlike anything seen previously, and most of all, the inner working and massacre taking place in North Korea wasn't a threat or interfering with U.S. interests. It wouldn't be until North Korea would develop nuclear weapons that the U.S. would become more interested in North Korea. George H.W. Bush would work hard with South Koreans to remove all nuclear weapons from the peninsula as a gesture to get North Korea to agree to inspections. His attempts at appeasement would prove only to be temporary, as Juche cannot allow for Korea to be unarmed against what they perceive as a vicious animal wanting to destroy their superior way of life. Clinton and George W. Bush perceived North Korea differently, but that didn't make for any drastic policy changes. Clinton's Secretary of State Madeleine K. Albright visited North Korea and drank champagne with Kim Jong-il. Ironic, as Albright and her family had to flee Czechoslovakia for fear of a murderous ideology. However, she did return with an understanding that their country and absolute control is no accident and by no means ran by irrational leaders. When talking about Kim Jong-il, she described him as, quote, very decisive, impractical, and serious. Knowing how North Korea got to where it is today, with Juche controlling all of society, a hermit country that has for decades violated human rights and constantly was talked down upon from the world's greatest powers, has survived with no internal uprising, in addition to minimal outside interference, can only lead one to conclude that North Korea leadership is incredibly brilliant. Like any other genocide or massacre, Juche ideology and the system of oppression was developed in steps over decades. Apart from the Clinton and Bush Jr. policy of engagement, policies of wait and see, expecting a country to collapse under its own weight, underestimate how well North Korean leaders built up Juche. There is nothing the leadership hasn't planned for. They've slowly worked their people into absolute submission. U.S. leaders engage carefully to undo the decades of meticulous work North Korea has done. The underlying Juche must be slowly removed to break the cycle of human rights violations and open North Korea to the international community. North Korea says they are an anthill and the United States is an elephant. The anthill cannot kill the elephant, but they can push the elephant where they need it to go, and they have done so successfully since their founding. The answer is not simple, but greater understanding of the inner workings of this unique country can only help in dismantling this isolated hell and welcoming them into the international community. Alright, that's all I have for you today. I hope you learned something new about Juche, Kim Il-sung, North Korea, and U.S. policy regarding North Korea. I understand it's a very complicated subject that, quite frankly, I'm not even completely sure I understand. It sounds like nobody really has a complete idea of what Juche is. I had the luxury of listening to a speaker in one of my classes who was a North Korean refugee. And after he got done presenting his presentation, we were able to ask questions, and somebody in my class asked him, as North Korean, how would you define Juche? What is it? It's, we don't really fully get it. Could you elaborate on it? And he paused for a good 5 seconds. And I think that alone is a good tell of how complicated it is. That somebody that, given he left North Korea when he was about 10, this stuff is indoctrinated into your brain from as soon as you can talk. So the fact that even he didn't know exactly how to explain Juche just goes to show how complicated it really is. And in case you're wondering, I think his answer was something along the lines of, you are the regime, everybody in North Korea is the regime. So tell me what you think, leave a comment. If you thought this video was helpful, go ahead and give it a like, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I don't know if I'll do anything like this again. This is just a video essay that I've been wanting to do for a while. Anyway, thank you.